All right, this is Heat Check. It is loaded, and I mean loaded. We had some stuff planned. We were going to do some college football stuff, and we're still going to talk about college football because there is news. But because of that news, we weren't going to ever be able to do our regularly scheduled programming. So, contents of today's show, we are going to start off by talking about the report about Arizona State's recruiting improprieties during the COVID dead period, what that means, what the discourse around that means. We're going to get to that for sure. And we're going to put our journalism hats on. Mine says make a great day on it. If you're watching the video, you can see that. If you're listening, okay. We're going to talk about that and everything going on with NIL legislature, maybe or maybe not coming, with hearings going on right now in our nation's capital on a federal level, which has not really happened before. So it's been interesting to watch that now. And apparently Mark Few is now the voice of college basketball. So that's fun too. Gabe Swartz is my co-pilot today. Gabe, let's get right into everything going on with ASU off the top. So if you've not read it, there's been a lot of reporting done here from Yahoo, from The Athletic specifically, about Arizona State, a dossier, vans full of recruits touring the facility covertly, maybe not so covertly, brazen disregard for the rules. These are just excerpts that I'm pulling from some of the reporting. Give a recap on exactly what's happened.
All right. So, and first of all, this is going to be the main concourse discussion of this podcast. And I will admit up front, overwhelmingly, that we may believe this to be a bigger deal than it is, solely because we are standing so close to the fire that we can't see how big or how wide or how small perhaps that the fire is. With that being said, I think given this will be a better podcast than had we had recorded it yesterday at 3:49 p.m. Central Time, as we currently sit here on Thursday afternoon. Of course, this comes out on Friday morning. With that being said, I think we have a better grasp of the situation, of what really is going down and whether it'll be a big deal or not. I think you have your opinion, I have my opinion, but let's first provide people with the facts. The fact of the matter is, Monday night, I definitely had no belief that this had anything to do with ASU, because George Reister tweeted, "We are on the verge of a story potentially to be broken in the next week or two that will rock the college football world, ruin legacies, and could impact the balance of power out west." Now, first of all,
hold on. Before you go, let that, if somebody is being, okay, if you're going to play pickup basketball, right? Put it in a context that I think a lot of our listeners can understand. And somebody is telling you how awesome they are, that should tell you something. Anyway, I'll let you continue.
So, first of all, with that being said, think about what was promised. It will rock the college football world, ruin legacies, and could impact the balance of power out west. Now, I'm not going to crap on ASU football. I'm not going to say that they're something that they're not. I don't know when the last time was anything in relation to ASU football to this point that would, quote unquote, impact the balance of power out west. If it's ruining legacies, who at ASU football has a legacy to ruin? Herm Edwards is a nice guy in college football, I guess. If
Antonio Pierce, his first college job, quite a legacy he's got.
Yeah. And rocking the college football world, like, it didn't get talked about on SportsCenter aside from like a 2-minute read. There was no discourse, no experts brought on. Like, it hasn't been that big of a deal. So that's the original start. Wednesday morning, we didn't know what the story was about. I figured, Oregon's in trouble, USC's in trouble, like something logically that would impact the balance of power out west, because those are the traditional powers. Maybe even
it's like, what's going on with Gonzaga?
I would have thought Washington before ASU, if you're really asking me. So that's where we're at. Wednesday morning, Doug Gallaher of The Athletic reported that ASU officials were, quote, aware of an investigation into COVID recruiting during the dead period. Reister later that morning said, quote, NCAA is investigating Arizona State for allegations related to football program. The allegations include paying players major, all caps, recruiting violations, COVID violations, and other things that have left serious concern about the coaching staff being able to coach this season. Then he tweeted, "The athletic story is not the story I was referring to. Tip of the iceberg as it relates to ASU." Pat Forty tweeted significant. He quote tweeted the Haller story, said significant, also not the only school currently under investigation for recruiting during the dead period. That's an important note because if ASU is found to have done what they've been alleged, and what they've alleged is bringing kids into the school and basically holding official visits during COVID when you can't do that and you can't be in contact, and organizing, doing all that. If they are found to not be the only program doing this during the dead period, it significantly hampers the amount of punishment that they can take for it. Because you can make an argument, and the NCAA probably could, if ASU is the only one that's found to have done this, that this was a 1 year rule, March 2020 to June of 2021. It was a 1 year rule. You guys just blatantly spat in the face of it. No one else was doing that. That doesn't seem to be the case. And I think that's a huge, important piece. David Shaw was quoted in a Pete Thamel article, which came out yesterday afternoon, and said, quote, "It's a disrespectful thing to do because the coaching profession and everyone involved in it, surely no one else was cheating, correct?" So that's where we're at with that. The Thamel article talked about the dossier, the alleged glut of recruiting violations, as the headline was written, and basically just former coaches, former assistants being upset about jobs they didn't end up with, sour grapes, sour apples, wanting to turn things in. And that's how we've led to here. So as it currently sits, nothing, I mean, an investigation starting the program. It seems the program was given this dossier to the compliance department. The compliance department had to go to the NCAA and report it. So self-reporting is what it appears under my knowledge. And based on that, things are underway. I don't at this time believe that it will have any impact on this coming season, but who knows? We'll see where it develops. That's the groundwork of what I've seen.
So I think the important thing to do next is to compartmentalize all the details now that you've just given us. You've done a really good job of synthesizing the information that's in front of us, right? As somebody who I'm now recalling on personal experience, as somebody who has worked in local radio and worked in these college towns, covering college sports, trying to carry a show, find things to talk about, this sells better than any story you can tell. So there's going to be a lot of salaciousness, especially in the early going, from people. I'm not going to name names, but I think you kind of just did for me. So let you put two and two together back home.
I think certain people were worse than others.
Oh, yes, most certainly. The only thing to do here from a journalistic standpoint, not to take a moral high ground, the only thing to do here is to wait and see. The NCAA process. No, what I'm saying here,
the
NCAA process takes sometimes as long as 2 to 3 years in these investigations. So to come out and say that there have been, quote, major recruiting violations being investigated without being willing to cite multiple sources or really do anything to substantiate those claims, that makes it fairly worthless to me at this point in time. Important information to lay out. Every program and anybody who believes differently is incorrect and naive is paying players. I personally believe in college football, and maybe this is wrong, maybe it's not. I'm sure we'll get into all the minutia about this on a more macro level, a less Arizona State level. If you're not cheating in college football right now, you simply aren't trying that hard.
Or at least cutting corners.
Right, exactly. You're going to try and find any slack, any loopholes in the rules. Sometimes you can be covert and sneaky about it. Sometimes teams are just brazen and overt, as it seemed ASU was in these COVID recruiting visits. Now, I think it's also important to note that the only things that have been reported on by actual reporters at this point in time with legitimate information and sourcing have been these COVID recruiting violations where players were practically brought on official visits that were considered unofficial visits, but the procedure was that of an official visit in which ASU paid for transit, things like that, improprieties that they wouldn't even be allowed to do in a normal year, right? Which isn't great. And I'm not going to just turn my nose up at that fact. But again, it's something that every program in the country does. And I'm not just conjecturing here. I follow recruits because I like to see what's going on with them. You know how many visit pictures I got from inside team facilities over the course of COVID? It's innumerable. They're accidentally dry snitching on these programs, these recruits, all the time. So do I think ASU is doing anything in this regard that everybody else wasn't doing already? No. Do I think that college football programs probably didn't take COVID as seriously as the rest of the country? Yes. Do I think there's any possible outcome in which coaches would not be, and coaching staffs and programs wouldn't be massively detrimentally impacted by not ignoring this dead period? No, I don't. Because if you do, you're falling way behind your competition and you're going to get fired. You can't just not recruit for a year. The damage it would do to a program is massive. So all the programs in the country were always going to disobey these rules. ASU just got caught because a disgruntled employee literally stuck the information in the face of the NCAA as they attempted to look the other way. That's my understanding on a base level of what's kind of going on.
Yeah. So what else sticks out to me? So some of the things that were interesting was the reporting that Antonio Pierce has, quote, accumulated much of the power in the ASU program thanks to his recruiting reach. His rise to power has been enabled by Deputy Athletic Director Gene Boyd, who oversees football. Thamel continued to write, with Pierce's power has also come division, as coaches have lost jobs, recruiting staff have felt pressure to blindly follow Pierce's aggressive tactics, and multiple sources said that those who insisted on avoiding recruiting gray areas were ostracized. Quote, there's too many disgruntled people. That makes plenty of sense. It would somewhat fall in line with the fact that ASU's recruiting approach has taken a different one, a more national one, which has been spearheaded by Antonio Pierce.
Yeah.
Antonio Pierce spearheaded the hirings of Prentice Gill and Chris Hawkins. Not to say that's wrong, but certainly that's going to upset some people. And if said people have no desire to coach college football anymore and potentially coach professional football, and then the professional football thing goes out the window, you could see a reason and an incentive to do such things. That was being called out, which brings me to the Eno Benjamin tweets, which you brought up is something that is way out of line for what we typically see, and you just don't normally see.
For clarity, Eno Benjamin, former ASU running back that played under. Are we just going to name the coach that everybody has already kind of done it for us? So the coach is Kevin Mawai, who
that's
was
what we think.
That is what we believe. That is what has been all but confirmed by former players, coaches.
One of them legitimately, I'll read Eno's tweets.
Yeah. So There have been a lot of, just for clarity, before you dive into it, there have been players on social media pretty much subtweeting at this person who has informed the NCAA via ASU of these infractions, and they're upset about it.
So Eno has sent 6 tweets. The first tweet was sent 2 hours ago, 1:04 p.m. Central Time on Thursday afternoon. Grown-ass men going out sad because they're upset. That was tweet number 1. Tweet number 2, the saddest thing I think this he meant to say about. The saddest thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies, SMH. Tweet number 3, the man gave you an opportunity, said nothing but great things about you at all times, and folks turned backs to run their mouths. Pathetic. I think the man is in reference to Herm Edwards. Tweet number 4, what is loyalty? Built an ongoing 20-year relationship and went out so sad. Tweet number 5, my mans was more worried about hanging with the EQ equipment staff to get gear than actually working, laughing, crying emoji. And then someone responded to that and said, guy couldn't even recruit well while wearing his Hall of Fame jacket at a home visit. Hand in the palm in the face emoji. And Eno quote tweeted it with his 6th and final tweet, said literally. So that's where we're at.
And it's not even just former players. The thing that's getting me is that we're seeing active players do this. And I mean, the thing that's so frustrating to me about this is that if this truly was Kevin Mawai submitting this dossier of information in order to get revenge of some kind on these coaches that he felt had treated him unfairly, right? And by the way, sidebar, important to note, yeah, Antonio Pierce has accumulated power. Well, the head coach is in his 70s. Nobody thought he was going to do this for very long. And Antonio Pierce has kind of always been the head coach in waiting, especially now that Danny Gonzalez is no longer with the program. He took the head coaching job in New Mexico. Yeah, of course he's accumulating power. There's a good chance he was, I mean, I don't know what this affects now. There's a damn good chance that regardless of what happened this year with ASU, and it looks like it was in store for a pretty good year and may still be, this is going to hang like a cloud all year long. Antonio Pierce was probably going to be the next head coach at Arizona State, maybe as soon as this next season. Aside from that, you want to get back at Antonio Pierce, Herm Edwards, what have you. The only people that are actually going to get hurt by this are kids just trying to play college football. And that sucks that somebody would do that. And to say that what ASU was doing is amoral or wrong in a legal sense beyond what the NCAA arbitrarily decides, that's the thing that I really have trouble with, because I don't think there's anything that was really too ethically wrong other than potentially endangering your own players and your staff with COVID. Yeah, sure. That's a fair point. But that, I think, is the point of frustration for players, is that there was somebody out there that was willing to throw this program underneath the bus, knowing that with it, the players would get flattened as well.
Yeah, it's odd to me. And I don't think 4 years ago when Herm Edwards was hired, that anyone would even have put into a 5x5 bingo card.
Mm-hmm.
Head coaching career ends in NCAA turmoil. If that was an option, you would have just whiffed it, scoffed at the idea of that being any possibility. So it surprises me and it would shock me to find out that Herm Edwards was complicit in this for a long time. And not to say that bad people don't cut, that good people don't cuss, but you point out to me, the man doesn't cuss at his players. He's
never said a curse word in his life, he claims.
Yeah. So it would shock me if he was knowingly let's do this, guys, all the time. But who knows? It's something that's certainly not going to be resolved for a while. And I think ASU's hopes would just be it drags out to some extent, not too long, but certainly past this year. You point out to me, if they win a bunch of games this year, no one's taking back the memories. No one's taking back the highlights. We're all going to remember the games. And, you can erase, quote unquote, the history book, but people are still going to know what happened.
Exactly.
Louisville won the 2013 national championship. Jim Boeheim, won those games. They got vacated. All of those things are stupid. It's so confusing to me. And I've just like you, I've never seen players come to bat in the way that they have, past and present guys. It's been interesting to see. It's also been interesting to see the reports of some people think that Herm was knowingly doing it. Some people think that he was not aware. So I don't know.
And
yeah,
speculating here, NCAA football at its base level to compete for championships, you have to have a certain number. It is a statistical fact of 5 and 4-star players every year. ASU has not been at that level ever. They are trending towards that level for the first time. Now, I say
Still
this
have
kind
not
of
signed a 5-star. Still have not signed a 5-star.
I was about to say, I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but I feel like you shouldn't be allowed to get recruiting violations if you've not signed a 5-star. Like that should be against the rules.
Like Ole Miss, to go back to Hugh Freeze.
Yeah.
Ole Miss was slinging that bag, and Ole Miss was not like unabashedly just signing 5-stars out of the blue when they had done it previously, but then they had a decent gap where they were not doing so well. Ed Orgeron, ironically, was there and not doing very well as a head coach. And then they get Hugh Freeze, and he gets Kemdichi, he gets DK,
Treadwell,
AJ Brown, all these dudes. Who knows what? That a lot of 5-stars, and the reason I feel like they got the reason they got the whistle blown on them was Saban and them being like, yo, this is our division, this is our conference.
Yeah.
And this one is like just somebody mad that they didn't get a job.
Yeah, I mean, like we're talking about, and I just want to look this up to verify. So when we're talking about what Ole Miss was doing, you're talking about the top 5 recruits in school history were all signed in a 3-year window. Like out of nowhere. Kemdichi, Laramie Tunsil, and Treadwell in 2013, all those guys were like 5-stars in the top 15, right? That's not what ASU's done. Digressing though, when you sling around major recruiting violations, remember, college football is a wild place, folks. Like weird stuff happens, unbelievable stuff happens all the time. Like just earlier this offseason, when you say major recruiting violations, I'm thinking, well, Tennessee just self-reported to the NCAA that they were handing McDonald's bags to players with thousands of dollars in cash, untraceable bills to high school football players. That's a major recruiting scandal. And by the way, 6 months have passed. Tennessee self-reported that to the NCAA, and nothing has happened yet. So that also goes to show you the NCAA, this stuff takes time. When you say major recruiting violations, I'm thinking Oklahoma State having cocaine and illicit substances in their locker room, Des Bryant becoming an academic All-American while 80% of his work is done by tutors, and additional, like, just crazy stuff happening when Les Miles was in Stillwater. North Carolina inventing an entire class for athletes to take while on campus. That took 3 years
and
for the NCAA to arrive on a punishment
program, and funneling them into a degree program.
Like that's what recruiting violations, college improprieties that are major. That's what that is. That is not what's been reported for ASU at this point.
Have you heard of Nevin Shapiro? Can I interest you in $930 million operation of boatloads of money and impermissible gifts to 72 student athletes? That was a 3-year probation, so it can't be worse than that. To sneak a couple people into a program. I'm not saying it even happened. I don't know that if it happened.
Allegedly.
That's very important to remember. All of those things are important to remember. It's also a matter of, as the years go by, I think this needs to go out there. Obviously, you and I have a different perspective than others because we are in this sports media industry. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent, aside from professional sports at this point, the rooting interests have gone somewhat out the window. I understand that college athletics is one of the oddest fandoms possible. A lot of the time you're rooting for 18 to 22-year-olds. You're rooting for 16 to 17-year-olds to make decisions to go to a school. that you also probably chose to go to at some point, and you beloved and you enjoyed. And because of that, the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years of your life, you're going to root for that school and hope that kids go there and enjoy it just like you did.
Sure.
With that being said, there needs to be a certain level of rationality with college athletics and fans of college athletics, because if your rival program does something illegal and you want to stand on the moral high ground of, maybe we'll say the heights of Camelback Mountain, and you want to scream from the top of Camelback Mountain and say, they're cheating so bad, how could you ever support that program? And then a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, after you've drug them through the mud for so long, egg splatters on your face, and it turns out your program wasn't the cleanest as well. And then you suddenly want to be like, but it's not that big of a deal. Be consistent. And if you're not going to be consistent, just shut up, because a lot of people are doing this, and you look really, really stupid when you want to point out your rivals cheating and then be like, I don't think we did anything. So aside from a moral, which people are going to debate the moral rights of paying kids or not, aside from that, let's just chill out on the whole slinging allegations around.
It's because it plays. Scandal plays. People can get clicks on articles. Notice how the people who don't need to get clicks on articles aren't running their mouth. So listen to where it's coming from before making judgment on any of this stuff. Again, there's no college headline that plays better than Coach X fired, coaching search begins, and Coach/Team X in trouble, NCAA investigation.
Yeah.
Editors love it because it's going to get a lot of traffic. But with that said, what is the moral outrage over? These are individuals in a capitalistic economy being paid. And this is on the grandest scale. And I promise you that ASU players are getting paid. You don't recruit at this level of incline this quickly without the bag getting thrown around. But it's getting thrown at every single Power 5 school. That is a promise. With that said, I'm 21. You are 20. If we had a skill or thing that we could do that was desirable, we could get paid for it. I get paid to freelance graphic design work. You get paid to write. It's because we are over 18, considered adults. And I mean, in different states, it's over 14. You actually have to be compensated in some way. And you can say that these players are compensated with their degrees. And I would say there's no hard cap on the amount of money that I can make for a piece of artwork or a story that you did. If somebody is willing to pay you X amount, there is nothing illegal about accepting that money. So I ask again, what is amoral? Amoral, not incorrect in the NCAA's eyes, not punishable by the NCAA, but amoral about what's happening here. The answer is absolutely nothing. So if people are going to hop on social media and be like, this is disgusting. No, it's not. It is absolutely not.
No, disgusting.
Maybe against the NCAA rules, but it's not morally outrageous.
Disgusting is the level of things that like Rick Pitino was doing at Louisville with strippers in dorms and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Recruiting visits is a different situation. So if that's all you got, that's all I've got. And I think we're good, at least on the surface level of our first discussion. I'm sure that there will be maybe more news, but I think that this could become an us versus the world season for ASU football.
I think the next week or so will be pretty telling about how much buoyancy the story has, whether it stays relevant, whether we find out more information, because again, this NCAA process, it takes years. And now that they're investigating, they almost always find something, because there's almost always something to find. Again, I reiterate, every program in the country has skeletons in the closet. But ASU is set up to have what could be an all-time year for them. And the only way that this individual thing affects this individual year, to me, is that it facilitates the resignation or termination of coaches on the staff, or that the distraction lingers over this team like a dark cloud and it hampers them in some way throughout the course of the year.
Yeah.
Is that we're good on this topic now?
I would agree with that. I think that's literally the only way it changes this season, is if there's a coaching change. I honestly think that from what I've seen, there's enough of a communal backing within the roster of everyone kind of knowing what's gone down, that it will be like I just said, an us versus them mentality from that building out. And maybe it becomes more sheltered, and maybe they're less friendly with the media, and maybe they're, I don't know what the changes will be. But I think that mentality might come from this, and we'll see. Maybe there will be no more nice guys, and maybe it'll just be beating teams down a bunch. So who knows? I don't know.
Again, I would like to remind people at home, there was a Bleacher Report headline on a story that included McDonald's bags, cash, the University of Tennessee, in which the first line was, at the University of Tennessee, a Big Mac apparently came with a big stack.
Elite lead.
Great lead. That's a thing that's going on, and there's been no punishment for that yet. So just to, contextualize what's happening.
Yeah, and 6 months gets you to at least January.
Absolutely.
So
let's talk about an actually relevant storyline in college sports, and that is what's going on in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, as there are federal hearings ongoing regarding name, image, likeness rights. We've already seen on a state level, I think it's now the numbers 19 states approve legislature saying that college athletes can profit off their name, image, and likeness. How big of a story do you think this is right now, Gabe?
So there's 19 states with laws in place, 11 states with bills that are in legislative process. July 1st, the state laws in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Texas, they all go into effect. But what's probably going to happen is the NCAA is probably going to file a lawsuit that asks a judge for an injunction. That way they can postpone the law going into enactment. On June 23rd, this is what I've been reading, the NCAA's D1 Council is expected to act, quote, if feasible, on proposed changes. We'll see what happens there. I think that what we've learned, and this going to court, is it was going to become a political thing. It was going to go from being a bipartisan issue to a partisan issue, because both of the Democrats and the Republicans are going to have a basically measuring contest to see who can get their point and their bill in correctly, because they want to take credit for it. In general, I think NIL is something that most everyone is down for to some extent, unless you are just a complete old head, stuck in their ways about the long ago ways that NCAA football and basketball was, and NCAA sports. I think different people have different levels of acceptance of what they want, and whether it's being able to do commercials, being able to sign autographs, or just outright being paid. Different people agree with, and even you and I have different perspectives on what we think should be allowed and what shouldn't. That's
and by the way, I don't know what the right answer is. And I think that's kind of generally where we all sit.
Yeah. And so for that, that's why I think you can't just go 0 to 100 immediately. I think it's going to have to be a slow, gradual thing. I also just don't think it's going to happen very quickly, because there's going to be fights between these senators to try to figure out who gets the say of what truly happens. And so it doesn't seem like anything's going to change really anytime soon, but it's very interesting to see what coaches like Mark Few have gone and said, like, we need help from the government to legislate this, not run this, but legislate this, and set things up so that we know what's legal and illegal. And we don't have assistant basketball coaches going to federal prison for recruiting. So that's where we're at on this. I don't know if it's a huge discussion because I feel like everything's kind of out in the open and it's just moving at a snail's pace.
I think it's so curious that the NCAA has been like all about the messaging of like, hey, we're trying to do this. We're forward thinking. And then they're literally doing everything they can to stall it from happening.
I think they feel overwhelmed, but
good. They should. This is a long time coming. It is probably something that is going to be murky. Like there are probably going to be issues, especially with the bigger sports. But the people it really helps are the smaller sport athletes that can go and teach swimming lessons and make money off of that, because you can't get a part-time job while you're a college athlete. The concept of amateurism doesn't make sense to me. We've talked a lot about that, which is the NCAA's prime function, is to protect amateurism. But aside from all that, this is an inevitability happening on a federal level or not. The fact that it's being acknowledged by the U.S. government adds a level of legitimacy to it, but I think in the long run, it's probably going to stall the process of it actually happening, which is what the NCAA wants.
Yeah, it's just tough to think that they seem like they're so open to it, and there are obviously pros to it. I think that the thing that should intrigue them the most is the fact that they would have less to worry about, I guess, if it's well structured. And I guess that's the argument for slowing it down, is to get a good structure in place. But they feel like the kid who keeps asking the teacher for an extension on the deadline over and over and over again. And it's like,
and not actually working on it.
Yeah. Like, when are you just going to actually do the report? So yeah. I don't think they get credit for that, as I just basically gave them credit for it. I think that there's value to the NIL part of you. We've seen it with TikTok. There are like Livy Dunn, who's an LSU gymnast and whatever. She could make tons of money if she had NIL rights and could advertise and stuff like that. Odyssey Alexander should have been able to cash in big, and I guess she was able to because the season ended and she went pro. But if she was a sophomore and she had 2 more years of college softball left, she'd have to hope that James Madison gets back to Women's College World Series again, and who knows if that happens. So yep. I think that there's a case to be made that it helps the baseball players, it helps the elite women's athletes and TikTok athletes, TikTok relevant athletes, and all those. It helps them more than it helps the football and men's basketball players, because honestly, I think those guys are getting treated pretty well, and I think that under the table they're getting stuff that bothers us because we have to, every time there's a scandal, we have to talk about it. That's the only thing that's an inconvenience to us. But really, it's the smaller school athletes. It's the athletes that are on partial scholarship, like baseball and stuff, that are kind of getting screwed, and we want to fix that. So that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah. And I mean, there will be moments where, it gets kind of out of control, like X car dealership in Durham paying a player $1 million to do a car commercial, and what college student has $1 million in their back pocket? $1 million might be an aggressive number, but like 6 figures, I think, is totally plausible. That will happen. And I don't know what that means, but this is an inevitability, and it's a good thing. It should be an inevitability. We're going to have to just kind of feel our way through the minefield a little bit, I think, and figure out what works, what doesn't. But the only way to do that is to actually go through it. And that's where we're at with NIL. Mm-hmm. So I think we've fairly assessed the situation.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right. I promised college baseball. We promised college baseball. Let's talk some college baseball with our good friend, Karli Matthias. All right, joined now by Karli Matthias, formerly contributor at D1 Baseball, and just follows the sport religiously. Before that, good friend of Gabe and I's at ASU Baseball. And Karli, let's dive right into this, okay? So back in Omaha, didn't get last year. We're here now. Vanderbilt's the reigning defending national champions. They're back. Every team in the SEC, it feels like, went to this big event, except for Arkansas. How big of a void is felt by the number one overall national seed not being there?
Honestly, to me, it feels like 2017 Oregon State and 2019 UCLA. Both of those teams got knocked out in supers, and I think everyone went into it saying they're the number one team, they're going to win it. So it feels like that to me again. And like you mentioned, Vandy's the reigning champs, but Tennessee's really good. Like a lot of teams, I think, can surprise us in Omaha this year. And I don't think that there is that clear defined, this team's going to win anymore.
Yeah, so we come into this weekend, the 8 teams that made it to Omaha. We got Arizona, Mississippi State, NC State, Stanford, Tennessee, Texas, Peyton mentioned Vanderbilt, and Virginia. For the people who are going to be the casuals and are just turning on the College World Series as it gets to Omaha, and didn't get to watch the regionals or super regionals, what stood out to you so far, and what is like the crash course you got to know going into this next couple weeks?
Well, one thing that I love is that it is kind of spread out across the conferences: 3 SEC, 2 PAC, 2 ACC, and Big 12. So I think it's pretty evenly spread out talent-wise. I think Stanford shocked a lot with how easily they beat Texas Tech. And I think, honestly, they shouldn't be considered an underdog in this, but they probably are, just because they've been consistently good, but nothing that really jumped off your screen. But Brendan Beck, Alex Williams, they have good arms and an offense that can hit. I mean, Arizona, all you heard about their entire season was their offense, and I think that's kind of held true. And then, I mean, Vandy, the 1-2 punch with Rocker and Leiter, that they know how to perform at the highest level. I mean, Rocker's thrown a no-hitter before in supers, and Leiter seems like he's been doing this in his entire life so far in postseason. And I'd expect nothing less in Omaha. Tennessee is very, very good. I think they're an all-around team that's going to compete. It's been, I think, like 15 years since they've been in Omaha, but I wouldn't say that that's going to affect them at all. Obviously, Virginia and NC State, they're the surprise teams. They were at the bottom of the ACC and didn't expect to make it this far. But if you've watched Virginia especially, they have a lot of good team chemistry, which I think gets you far, especially in postseason. And I think that's going to help them a lot. I mean, Virginia's the 2014, 2015, they were in Omaha before, so they know how to do it. Obviously, it's not the same team, but it's still the same staff that's going to get them there. Texas, Ty Madden, he shoves. I mean, it's as simple as that. They have a well-balanced offense too, and Tristan Stevens and Pete Hansen behind Ty Madden are great starters too. So it's not going to ease up very much in that. I mean, I think Texas is beatable because the Big 12 championship, they lost. They didn't make it as far as they should have. I mean, towards the end of the season, regular season too, they proved to be beatable. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to come out on their A game and show up. So, like I said before, I think it's a pretty even playing field this year. I think some would probably now that Arkansas is out, someone put Tennessee ahead of most, or I forgot Mississippi State. They know Omaha. They know Omaha well. They know how to play. Landon Sims is one of the best relievers in the country, and he's improved his draft stock drastically this year, and he's obviously going to show up too. So I think Tennessee might slightly be out of the game, but besides them, it's going to be pretty competitive all around.
So you mentioned some of the names. There's a ton of top end elite, like we're talking top 10 draft prospect pitching in Omaha this year. You mentioned that Kumar Rocker's been there, done that. He's been a starter in a College World Series already as a true freshman when Vandy beat Michigan a year ago. But if there was a guy that you had to pick, your team's up against the wall, losers bracket already, who's taking the mound for you?
I would say Jack Leiter. I mean, I know he hasn't done it before, but he has that bulldog mentality where he goes on the mound and it's his world, and that's it. All he focuses on is what he's doing there in that pitch, and that's kind of the mentality that you need to get you far and to succeed. I mean, like you said, there are a lot of good arms. I mean, Alex Williams, probably a name you hadn't heard before, threw a complete game shutout in supers for Stanford. So there's a lot of talented arms. Ty Madden, which I mentioned. I know Ty because I worked with him on the Cape, and he is the quietest, nicest guy ever. But when he's on the mound, he'll shove. Like he knows what he's doing. But I think I would have to go Leiter, just because he wants to win, and I think he has a lot of emotion behind it, but you'd never see any of that emotion on the mound.
Okay. So we get started on Saturday. Stanford and NC State is the first matchup. Vandy and Arizona is the nightcap. And then Sunday we got Tennessee and Virginia, Texas and Mississippi State. Of those 4 opening weekend first games, which one intrigues you the most, and which one are you like, this needs to be appointment viewing for people?
I would say Vandy, Arizona, because it's top arms against top offense. I am interested to see how the offense of Jacob Berry, Sustack, that whole offense of Arizona going up against Rocker, most likely, is very intriguing for me.
Does the Arizona versus Vandy matchup, the fact that Arizona has such a great offense and maybe they're not completely reliant on home runs, but TD Ameritrade being kind of a bigger ballpark, do you think that challenges them in a way that maybe in the Women's College World Series, we see Oklahoma has an overwhelming offense, but that game can be a little more home run oriented? Is that too much of a challenge and something that you think maybe favors Vandy and the arms in this situation?
I think it might slightly. I mean, Tucson is high elevation, so that helps them a lot too, but it's not like they didn't do the same thing on the road before. So they've played in parks that aren't high Corbett, and still shown up and had the same power. I don't think it's going to be as many home runs as we've seen before, but I still think that they're going to be hitting.
So I want to ask you for the stories that people are going to learn watching these broadcasts, getting acquainted with these teams, and we can get to that. But I think the guy that's going to steal the nation's hearts and kind of already has is Stephen Schock, Scooch of Virginia. I mean, the post-game sound's been incredible to listen to. But if there's another guy that's not him that's going to get people's attention, that story that is going to really, grip folks, what is that?
I mean, with Schock, I think I tweeted, I want to be friends with this guy. How can you not?
Or if you can't give a specific name, which team do you find
Yeah.
like most likable,
Yeah.
or that the nation could kind of get behind?
Right.
I think Stanford deserves it because I don't think they've gotten enough credit the entire year. Obviously, they've been ranked for most of the year, but you just really haven't heard much about them. And I think even in postseason so far, in regionals and supers, like they swept Texas Tech and had two phenomenal pitching performances, but it was kind of like, okay, that's over now. And now let's move on to the other teams. And I'm like, no, I think you need to go a little bit deeper into what they're doing. So I think if a team deserves it, I think Stanford deserves it just because they haven't gotten it already. Obviously, like, you know how good Tennessee is, you know how good Vandy is, you know that they're going to be there, but you really haven't heard much about Stanford. And obviously you could say the same thing about Virginia and NC State just because they weren't expected to be there at all. Yeah. They weren't ranked or anything, but I think Stanford kind of deserves that recognition.
If we're going into this based on, I've seen you quote tweeted Reed Simpson, who said that this was a boring College World Series from a fan perspective. You called that a trash take. Do you care to explain that?
So I know Reed, we worked on the Cape together. And he is very passionate about college baseball, which I love that. Now we kind of went into it a little bit. He said it was more strictly about the fans, not the teams themselves. But I think either way, it's a trash take, in my opinion. Because I do think these are good teams that are playing, and their fan bases are going to show up and show out. Like, they're playing on the highest level. The fans are going to be there, and they're going to support them, and they're going to be loud. They're going to want to cheer them on. Like, it's not any other game. Like, it's Omaha. Like, they're going to be there. So to say that it's boring or not going to be as exciting as years past, I think is wrong and is a low blow to fan bases, because that's where you want to see your team. That's why you support them, is to see them there at the highest level. So whether it's talking about the fan bases themselves or the actual teams, I can't imagine it in any way being boring, especially because I mentioned, it's not all SEC. It's spread across different conferences. So it's going to be a mix of fans. It's going to be a mix of teams and different kinds of play, which I think will be very interesting.
So considering that, and I think this kind of goes in line with what you were just saying about, why this will not, in fact, be trash. Considering there is such a mysticism, especially about Omaha, but the postseason in both of the bat sports, softball, baseball, and getting to Oklahoma City, getting to Omaha, and that field of dreams type energy that exists in those places. Considering we didn't get it last year, how are you anticipating the emotion kind of to play as an atmosphere in the building at TD Ameritrade?
I think for the players, they're gonna take it in. They're gonna play with emotion because, like you mentioned, they didn't get it last year. Some of these guys are getting the chance to play an extra year, so they're gonna take advantage of it. I don't think anyone's gonna leave anything on they want to give it their all because they want to win. They want to do it for their team. This year, more than any other, teams have gone through it with COVID, whether they've had to stop playing or travel's been restricted, or Stanford had to start the season late because they simply couldn't practice. So they've been through it. And I think just as a team, they want to give it their all to show that it was worth it. So I think more than ever, these guys are going to play with their whole heart.
All right. So no Arkansas, as we mentioned. Texas is the highest remaining seed. Vanderbilt is the team that I feel like is getting the most buzz as the quote unquote tournament favorite now. Before the whole thing gets going, we'll ask you your prediction. Who wins the College World Series and why?
It's like I want to go with Vandy just because they have the experience, but I think Tennessee is going to give them a run for their money. I mean, Tennessee made it to the SEC championship and brought Arkansas to the very last out. I mean, they played very, very well, and they've played well the entire season. That's tough. That's tough. And then, like I said, I think Stanford can go far.
You wouldn't be the first baseball correspondent that we brought on that's been higher on Stanford than most people have been. So
yeah, I mean, being a Pac team, I think I've watched them more closely than others, and I know a few guys on the team, so I know how they can compete. So I wouldn't be surprised if they make a splash in Omaha.
All right, Karli, thank you so much for joining the show today. We are very excited to get the action going from the state of Nebraska. Tell the people where they can find you.
I'm on Twitter at Karli Matthias, KarliMathias. Pretty simple, first and last name. So follow me there, and if you want to talk college baseball, I'm your gal. So.
All right, thank you, Karli.
Thank you.
All right, scholarship and sanctions time, and by sanctions, not directly referencing anything going on with ASU.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, you go.
All right, I'm going to start with a scholarship. I'm going to start with something positive. Finishing what you started. Awesome to see Greg Oden. He got his degree at Ohio State this week. It's really cool to see that. I think a couple years ago, maybe it was last year or 2 years ago, Robert Ory kind of went back and got his degree from Alabama like years after he was done playing. And we were talking about on the Reclassified podcast on Tuesday, you were talking about how impressed you've been in the TBT with Jared Sollinger's coaching. I think Greg Oden, I've heard enough of him being on podcasts talking about the sport of basketball to think that he could easily be a pretty good big man coach and even work his way up to being a head coach or whatever. And to do that at the college level, you've got to have a degree. So if he wants to do that, he had to get this degree. He got one. I think it was in sports management, which is awesome to see. And it'll just be interesting to see what Greg Oden does in hanging around college athletics and just the sport of basketball for the next couple decades.
All right, scholarship. This is my only one. Forgot to get to it last week. Scholarship to Griff McGarry, pitcher from the University of Virginia, was incredible for UVA in an elimination game against Dallas Baptist last weekend. Went 6 no-hit innings, only allowed a handful of hits, but the most important part to me was that blood was actively just pouring out of his ring finger, and he was just wiping it against his white pants and pulling a Kurt Schilling for his guys and just toughing it out. And that was awesome to see him just pitch through that, shut down baseball, helped UVA to eventually win that game because they didn't score either. They got shut down until the very end. They end up winning. I think it was 1-0 or something of that nature. And that's how the game ended. So shout out to Big Griff. You can see him in Omaha this weekend.
Awesome. I've got one more sanction and one more scholarship. My sanction goes to creativity. Really just a boring name choice, I guess. It's interesting. It's the first bowl game that's ever been named after someone. Jimmy Kimmel the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl. It's going to be at SoFi Stadium. I'm also just down on this because people love to rag on the Pac-12. And part of it is because they sign themselves up for stupid bowl games like this, where they're just basically signing up for a loss when you send your fifth best team to play the best Mountain West team. It's just not a great idea. So I'm sanctioning the creativity of that, and I'm down on it I think our boy George Kliavkov needs to fix this.
I mean, maybe. Shout out, though. I mean, the point made, Jimmy Kimmel went to UNLV, went to ASU, getting his conferences some love.
That's true.
It is shocking that this is the first bowl game named after
a single person.
Like Martin Luther King, nah, we're good. Jimmy Kimmel, go ahead, let's go.
We could have had like Bryant Denny. We could have had so many other long time like football people.
I mean, no shots at Jimmy. Like, shout out to you, but
get that bag.
I figured it would be like the Jeff Bezos Bowl would have been a thing before this.
The Bill Gates techno, or the Gates versus Bezos, and we have like that game. What's the game? The Red Box Bowl that's up in San Francisco, whatever. And you just have one team aligns with Gates and the other team aligns with Bezos. Like the goodie bags for that bowl would be nuts.
Oh, ridiculous.
You got anything else, or you want my last scholarship?
Go for it.
All right, my last scholarship. I don't know how much we're going to actually see of this because probably just read stories about this fall is my scholarship goes to experimenting because Kevin Kelly, who was a former high school football coach, he was notorious for his desire to never punt.
The Arkansas guy.
Yeah, won 9 state championships in 18 years. Well, he's headed to the college level, and he's going to be the head coach. He's going to be the head coach at Presbyterian College.
The Blue Hose?
What do you think of this?
Love it. Love it. You know who started at Presbyterian?
Who?
Corbin. I think it's just a producer of great minds. Like Tim Corbin came out of Presbyterian. Now we've got a team that is not going to punt the ball at Presbyterian. That's awesome. Let's go.
Yeah, so I
think they're Big South. Come on, Big South.
It's coming to college football. Presbyterian College is getting Kevin Kelly. I found this in Sports Illustrated today. It might have been announced a while ago because this was like a feature story.
Yeah.
Kind of getting you inside the mind of him. One of the lines that really jacked me up was it saying, if Kelly receives backlash, he doesn't care. He has that conviction, that deep belief in the analytics spurred by his love of learning and the realization that there's more than one way to think about a problem. So
that's awesome.
I'm very excited to see how this works out. But yeah, that was my last scholarship.
And I'll tell you this, if it works, especially because it will be happening on the FCS level, if it works, he will be out of there to an FBS program in 2 years.
A low FCS program, and then we'll see if it works there too.
Yeah. That's the transmission of ideas in football has accelerated so fast to where everybody's just trying to get an edge. There's so much copycatting. This will move quickly if it's successful at this level, and if it's not just a gimmick. Yeah, this is terrific. I love this.
Exciting. That's exciting. I don't really care to watch it, but I want to hear how it works.
About what happened.
Yeah, I just want to know, like, how many times did they go for it on 4th down from inside their own 20?
I'm pretty sure that like Hugh Freeze is the only other guy that I know of that came straight from like high school. I guess UNLV hired the Bishop Gorman coach, and that went horribly. But I mean, hopefully it's more like Hugh Freeze than that guy, aside from the recruiting violations.
Was Gus Malzahn?
No, it was Gus Malzahn who I was thinking of. Went to Arkansas State, brought Hugh Freeze in on the staff. That's who it was.
Yeah,
won a national championship.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
What is? I don't know if it's replicable, but there we are. So,
dude's playing real life NCAA football in the NCAA. Awesome.
Yeah, fun to see.
Right. That's the show. Crazy jam-packed one. We will be back with pretty exciting podcast
on Tuesday.
next week. Yeah, on Tuesday. So stay tuned for that. This has been Heat Check. Thanks for listening.